January 1959. A young Cuban revolutionary named Fidel Castro led a guerrilla army to victory, toppling the US-backed Batista regime and seized control of Cuba. What began as a populist uprising against a corrupt and oppressive government quickly evolved into a communist revolution. Although Castro initially did not publicly identify as a communist, he gradually shifted his ideology and policies as he consolidated power. As relations with the United States deteriorated and the need for a strong ally grew, Castro increasingly aligned with the Soviet Union. By 1961, he publicly declared Cuba a socialist state, fully embracing Marxist-Leninist principles and solidifying the island's role as a communist stronghold in the Western Hemisphere. This ideological shift fractured the unity of the nation, driving many Cubans into exile as they fled the new oppressive regime. The United States, deeply entrenched in its ideological battle against the Soviet Union, viewed Castro's sudden shift to communism with alarm. With Batista, their former ally, ousted from power, the US saw its influence in the region rapidly slipping away. In the context of the Cold War, where the spread of communism was seen as a direct threat to American interests and global stability, Cuba's alignment with the Soviet bloc was unacceptable. The proximity of a communist state just 90 miles from the US shores was more than a geopolitical concern. It was a symbolic and strategic challenge that could not be ignored. Washington feared that Castro's Cuba would become a foothold for Soviet influence in the Western Hemisphere, sparking a new front in the Cold War and threatening the balance of power in the region. Something had to be done. In response to the growing threat posed by Communist Cuba, the US government turned to the CIA. Established in the aftermath of World War II, the CIA had become the primary tool for American covert operations during the Cold War, specializing in ideological subversions and the clandestine overthrow of foreign governments. When John F. Kennedy took office in January of 1961, he inherited a plan crafted by the CIA under the Eisenhower administration to overthrow Fidel Castro. Despite his reservations, the young president, eager to assert American dominance and prevent the spread of communism in the Western Hemisphere, gave the green light for what would become the Bay of Pigs invasion. This ill-fated operation would not only fail spectacularly, but also set the stage for a deeper and more insidious conflict, a covert war waged in the shadows. April 1961. The plan was set in motion. Backed by the CIA, a force of around 1,500 Cuban exiles landed at the Bay of Pigs on Cuba's southern coast. The plan seemed straightforward: deploy armed, US-trained Cuban exiles to spark an uprising, one that would quickly spread and ultimately topple Fidel Castro's regime. But from the very beginning, the operation was plagued by miscalculations and a lack of crucial support. The expected popular uprising never materialized, and without the promised air cover from the US military, the exiles were left vulnerable. Within 3 days, Castro's forces had crushed the invasion, capturing or killing the majority of the invaders. The Bay of Pigs was not only a military disaster, but also a significant political embarrassment for the Kennedy administration. It exposed the limits of US covert operations and deepened the animosity between the United States and Cuba. Castro now had evidence that the US was committed to his overthrow, pushing him further into the Soviet bloc for protection, and solidifying Cuba's role as a key ally in the Cold War standoff. Inevitably, this further deepened the divide between the United States and Soviet Russia. In the wake of the Bay of Pigs fiasco, the US government faced a grim reality. Castro's regime was more entrenched than ever, and Cuba's bolstered alliance with the Soviet Union posed an even greater risk. The failure of the invasion left President Kennedy deeply shaken, not only by the public humiliation, but also by his growing mistrust of the CIA and the broader intelligence community. Kennedy, a leader who had campaigned on strength and resolve, now found himself questioning the very institutions that had led him to this point. Yet, despite his reservations, Kennedy remained committed to preventing the spread of communism in the Western Hemisphere. The CIA, undeterred by the failure of the Bay of Pigs, quickly shifted tactics. Recognizing that direct military confrontation was no longer viable, the agency devised a new plan: Operation Mongoose. This covert operation, authorized by Kennedy in late 1961, aimed to destabilize Castro's government through a wide array of subversive activities, including orchestrating false flags, economic sabotage, psychological warfare, and targeted assassinations. At the heart of Operation Mongoose was a sophisticated and relentless propaganda campaign designed to undermine Castro's authority and erode public support for his regime. The CIA employed a wide variety of psychological tactics, many of which blurred the lines between covert operations and outright deception. One of the most notorious methods involved spreading disinformation, a common tactic of psychological operations. False news stories were planted in Cuban media outlets, suggesting that high-ranking officials within Cuba's government were secretly plotting against him. This was intended to sow distrust and paranoia among Castro's inner circle, weakening the cohesion of his leadership. Radio Swan, a covert CIA-operated radio station based on a small Caribbean island, became a key tool in psychological warfare. Broadcasting 24 hours a day, Radio Swan flooded the Cuban airwaves with anti-Castro propaganda, calling for a rebellion and spreading rumors about the regime's imminent collapse. These broadcasts were carefully crafted to sound like they were coming from within Cuba, giving the impression that opposition to Castro was widespread and that liberation was at hand. The CIA's efforts didn't stop with radio broadcasts. Leaflets, often dropped from planes or smuggled into the country, urged Cubans to rise up against Castro, promising U.S. support for any rebellion. Some of these leaflets contained fabricated stories of successful uprisings in other parts of the island, aiming to inspire similar actions in other regions. In one particularly audacious scheme, the CIA even planned to use U-2 spy planes to drop counterfeit Cuban currency, hoping to destabilize the economy and undermine public confidence in Castro's leadership. The CIA also orchestrated a series of fake incidents, or false flags, to create an atmosphere of fear and instability. In many instances, they staged attacks on Cuban infrastructure, such as blowing up industrial plants and setting fire to sugarcane fields, only to blame these acts on anti-Castro rebels. The goal was to convince the Cuban populace that organized resistance was growing and that Castro's hold on power was slipping. But perhaps the most controversial and morally questionable acts involved attempts to assassinate Castro himself. The US devised numerous plots to assassinate him, ranging from poisoning his cigars and spiking his drinks with lethal toxins, to more elaborate schemes like putting exploding seashells in his favorite diving spot, which to me sounds like something straight out of a Bond movie. While the exact number of attempted assassinations during Operation Mongoose specifically is difficult to pinpoint, it is widely reported that over the course of Castro's life, there were at least 638 assassination attempts attributed to the CIA and other US government entities. These assassination attempts, though unsuccessful, revealed the extreme lengths to which the US was willing to remove Castro from power. The ultimate goal of these actions was not just to weaken Castro's grip on power, but to create a pervasive sense of impending collapse, a carefully constructed illusion that his regime was teetering on the brink of failure. By fostering an environment of fear, mistrust, and instability, the CIA hoped to push the Cuban people into taking matters into their own hands, sparking a rebellion that would finally topple Castro's government. Despite the CIA's psychological approach to destabilizing his regime, Fidel Castro proved remarkably adept at turning the tables on his adversaries. Understanding the power of narrative, Castro used the very tactics employed against him to solidify his own position. He quickly rebranded the failed Bay of Pigs invasion as a victory for Cuban sovereignty, framing the event as a David versus Goliath struggle in which the Cuban people had heroically repelled a larger foreign invader. This portrayal not only galvanized support within Cuba, but also resonated with anti-imperialist sentiments around the world. Castro's state-controlled media became a powerful tool in his propaganda war, broadcasting the messages that depicted the United States as a ruthless aggressor bent on destroying the Cuban Revolution. Through carefully crafted speeches and broadcasts, Castro painted his government as the legitimate defender of the Cuban people against imperialist oppression. This narrative helped Castro build a lasting image as a revolutionary hero, not just within Cuba, but amongst supporters abroad who viewed him as a symbol of resistance against Western imperialism. By seizing control of the narrative, Castro effectively countered the CIA's efforts, maintaining public loyalty and casting the US as the true villain in the eyes of many Cubans and international observers. The echoes of this propaganda war still resonate today, as the narrative battles between the US and Cuba continue to shape perceptions and influence relations between the two nations. Operation Mongoose represented a new phase in the US strategy against Cuba and communist ideology as a whole. A war fought not with conventional weapons, but with deception, manipulation, and fear. The psychological and propaganda tactics employed during this operation set a precedent for future covert operations throughout the Cold War. Across the globe, from Latin America to Southeast Asia, the CIA and other US agencies continue to refine and deploy these methods, using subversion and disinformation as key tools in the ideological battle against communism. Many of the techniques pioneered during Operation Mongoose, such as spreading disinformation, staging false flag operations, and manipulating public perception, became staples in US foreign policy during this era. And guess what? The legacy of these tactics extends far beyond the Cold War. Even today, we see the enduring influence of psychological warfare and propaganda in conflicts around the world. The same principles of narrative control and perception management continue to be used by governments, corporations, and powerful entities to shape public opinion and achieve strategic objectives. But just as conventional warfare changes, so does psychological warfare, and the digital age has ushered in a new era where information can be manipulated more easily and rapidly than ever before. And you can bet it's being used for similar goals and objectives as it was during the 60s. Operation Mongoose serves as a stark reminder of the power of information and the lengths to which those in power will go to maintain control. As we reflect on this chapter of history, it is crucial to recognize the ongoing impact of these tactics and to remain vigilant against the manipulation of truth in all of its forms. As always, I welcome you to continue this conversation in the comment section below, and if you like this video, make sure you check out my other content. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.